Military uniforms are just costumes for kids playing dress-up now. Huh? Sergeant Marcus Reynolds' voice cut through the Friday evening buzz at Fort Maxwell's main canteen like a serrated blade. Every head in the crowded space turned toward the small woman standing near the serving counter. His words carried that particular brand of cruelty that comes from someone who's never had to question their own place in the world. Alexandra Hayes stood frozen, her porcelain skin flushing slightly as 200 pairs of eyes fixed on her. With her long blonde hair tied in a messy high bun, loose curls framing her face, and those captivating blue eyes that seemed almost too large for her delicate features, she looked like a princess who had somehow wandered into a war zone. The fitted light gray t-shirt and slim dark military pants she wore beneath her oversized uniform jacket only emphasized how out of place she seemed among the battle-hardened soldiers surrounding her. Seriously, Marcus continued, his 6'4" frame towering over her as he took a step closer, his muscled physique rippling beneath the green camouflage uniform that marked him as elite infantry. Who authorized this little fashion show? This is a military installation, not some community theater production. The laughter that erupted from his squad was harsh and immediate, phones already appearing in hands ready to capture what promised to be prime social media entertainment. In the shadowy corner booth near the emergency exit, Captain Ethan Cross lowered his newspaper just enough to observe the unfolding scene with cold, calculating eyes. After 3 months of careful surveillance, he was finally getting the opportunity to confirm what Umbra protocols suspected about the seemingly innocuous woman who had appeared on their radar. His fingers moved imperceptibly, activating the recording device concealed in his jacket. Alexandra remained perfectly still, her small hands trembling slightly as she clutched a paper napkin. Her gaze dropped to the floor in what appeared to be shamed shoulders, hunching forward in a posture that screamed vulnerability. Every instinct in the room read her as harmless, ordinary, completely overwhelmed by the aggressive attention. But in exactly 18 minutes, when Marcus would push too far and demand she remove that fraudulent uniform, everyone in Fort Maxwell would discover they had just witnessed the prelude to the most catastrophic mistake of their military careers. And when the tattoo on Alexandra's back was finally revealed, the entire base would fall silent as death. Marcus's squad closed ranks around Alexandra like a pack of wolves sensing weakness. Lieutenant Sophia Martinez, her perfectly styled black hair gleaming under the fluorescent lights, stepped forward with the practiced precision of someone who had built her entire identity around being the most intimidating woman in any room. "Oh my God," Martinez said, her voice dripping with theatrical concern as she circled Alexandra like a predator. "Sweetie, are you lost? The costume party is probably at the community center downtown, not on a federal military installation." Her words triggered another wave of laughter, several soldiers pulling out their phones to record what they assumed would be viral content. Alexandra's response was barely audible, her voice soft and uncertain. I have orders to report here." "Orders?" Marcus' laugh was sharp enough to cut glass. "From who? Your mommy, your drama teacher?" He gestured broadly to his audience, playing to the crowd with practiced ease. "Look at this, people. We've got ourselves a lost little princess wearing daddy's clothes." The mockery should have been devastating. Any normal person would have fled, tears streaming, dignity in tatters. But Alexandra simply stood there, absorbing each insult with an unnatural stillness that only the most observant would recognize as tactical patience. What the jeering crowd couldn't see was how Alexandra's eyes moved in controlled sweeps, automatically cataloging exits, counting personnel, assessing threat levels. Her feet, despite the apparent trembling, had shifted into a perfect balanced stance. Her breathing remained steady and controlled, even as her hands shook with what everyone assumed was fear. Cross noticed. His trained eye caught the micro movements, the subtle signs that suggested this woman was far more dangerous than her appearance indicated. He made a mental note to increase surveillance protocols immediately. Corporal Nathan Miller, a weapons specialist with arms like tree trunks and a face that looked like it had been carved from granite, decided to join the entertainment. "Hey, princess," he called out, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "You know basic drill commands, right? Since you're wearing our uniform and all." The challenge hung in the air like smoke from a discharged weapon. Miller expected hesitation, confusion, maybe even tears. What he got instead made him take an involuntary step backward. "Yes, Corporal," Alexandra replied, her voice suddenly crisp and clear. She snapped to attention with movements so precise, so perfectly executed, that the laughter began to falter. Her posture transformed from cowering civilian to textbook military bearing in the space of a heartbeat. About face, Miller commanded, certain he could trip her up. Alexandra executed the movement flawlessly, her combat boots clicking against the concrete floor with parade ground precision. The timing was perfect, the execution without flaw. Present arms, Miller continued, his confidence wavering slightly. Without hesitation, Alexandra brought her hands up in the exact position required for presenting an imaginary rifle. Her form so perfect, it could have been used as a training demonstration. The casual chatter in the canteen began to die as more soldiers noticed something wasn't quite right about this supposedly helpless woman. Marcus sensed the shift in atmosphere and moved quickly to regain control. "Lucky guess," he declared loudly. "Anyone can memorize a few moves from YouTube videos, but let's see how you handle real equipment." He unholstered his sidearm, ejecting the magazine and clearing the chamber with theatrical flair before extending the empty weapon toward Alexandra. "Field strip and reassemble. 30 seconds." It was meant to be an impossible challenge designed to humiliate and expose her as a fraud. Military weapons were complex precision instruments that took months of training to handle competently. No civilian could possibly. Alexandra's hands moved like liquid lightning. The weapon came apart in her grasp with a series of soft clicks, mechanical whispers that spoke of absolute familiarity. Spring barrel slide frame. Each component was removed with surgical precision and laid out in perfect order on the nearby table. The watching soldiers leaned forward, despite themselves caught between disbelief and growing unease. 15 seconds. That was all it had taken her to completely disassemble a service pistol that many of them still struggled with after months of training. The reassembly was even more impressive. Her fingers moved without conscious thought, muscle memory, guiding each motion as the weapon reformed in her hands. Click, snap, slide. In 12 seconds, the pistol was whole again, the action smooth as silk as she tested the mechanism before safely returning it to Marcus. Total time 27 seconds. The silence that followed was deafening. Marcus stared at the weapon in his hands as if it might bite him, his confident smirk replaced by something approaching confusion. Martinez's mouth had fallen open, her practiced superiority momentarily shattered. Miller was frantically trying to remember if he had ever seen anyone, including instructors, handle a weapon with that level of effortless competence. "Beginner's luck," Marcus said finally, but his voice lacked conviction. "Anyone can take apart a pistol if they've watched enough action movies." Alexandra said nothing. She simply returned to her previous position, hands clasped behind her back, eyes downcast as if the last 30 seconds had never happened. But Cross had seen enough. He discreetly activated his encrypted phone, sending a brief message to handlers who operated in shadows deeper than military intelligence. "Target demonstrating advanced capabilities. Request immediate analysis." Private James Wilson, barely 19 and still soft around the edges, despite 3 months of basic training, felt something twist uncomfortably in his stomach as he watched the treatment Alexandra was receiving. Unlike the others, Wilson came from a family where respect was earned through character, not intimidation. His grandfather had been a Marine at Iwo Jima, and the old man would have been disgusted by what was happening here. "Maybe we should just leave her alone," Wilson said quietly, but his words carried in the sudden stillness of the canteen. Marcus's head snapped around like a striking snake. "What was that, Private?" "I said maybe we should leave her alone, Sergeant." Wilson repeated, his voice stronger now, despite the tremor of fear. "She's not bothering anyone." "Oh, look at that," Martinez said, her smile turning predatory. "The newbie's got a crush on our little dress-up doll. How sweet." Her voice was poison wrapped in silk designed to inflict maximum psychological damage. Marcus's expression darkened as he recognized a challenge to his authority. In his world, respect was a zero-sum game. Any kindness shown to his target was a direct attack on his position. "Private Wilson, since you're so concerned about our guest's feelings, maybe you'd like to join her for whatever comes next." The threat was clear, and Wilson felt his resolve waver. But when he looked at Alexandra, saw the way she stood with quiet dignity, despite the abuse being heaped on her, something in his grandfather's teachings clicked into place. "Yes, Sergeant, if that's what it takes." For just a moment, Alexander's eyes flicked up to meet Wilson's, and he saw something there that made his breath catch. Not gratitude, not relief, but a kind of ancient, weary recognition, as if she had seen this scenario play out countless times before and knew exactly how it would end. The canteen had grown unnaturally quiet now, the usual Friday evening chaos replaced by the tense anticipation that precedes violence. Soldiers who had been laughing minutes before now sensed they were witnessing something that might have consequences far beyond simple entertainment. Colonel Robert Harris chose that moment to enter the canteen, his weathered face scanning the room with the automatic assessment of a career officer. At 61, Harris had seen action in 3 different conflicts and possessed the kind of situational awareness that came from decades of making life or death decisions. He immediately noticed the crowd formation, the cell phones, the palpable tension radiating from the center of the room. "What's the situation here?" Harris's voice cut through the noise like a blade carrying 30 years of command authority. Marcus snapped to attention, but his smile remained confident. "Just conducting an impromptu inspection, sir. Checking to make sure personnel are properly authorized to wear military uniforms on base." Harris's gaze moved to Alexandra, taking in her oversized jacket, her civilian clothes beneath her obvious discomfort. To his experienced eye, she looked like exactly what Marcus claimed, a confused civilian who had somehow ended up in the wrong place at the wrong time. "Ma'am," Harris said, his voice not unkind but carrying the weight of official inquiry, "do you have proper authorization to be on this installation?" Alexandra reached into her jacket pocket with movements so careful they seemed choreographed, producing a slightly crumpled set of papers. "Yes, sir. Orders to report for temporary duty assignment." Harris accepted the documents, his expression growing increasingly puzzled as he read. The orders appeared legitimate, bearing all the correct signatures and authorization codes, but something about them seemed off. The assignment details were vague, the reporting structure unclear. It was the kind of paperwork that raised more questions than it answered. "These orders are unusual," Harris said slowly, his military mind automatically flagging inconsistencies. "The authorization codes are correct, but the assignment parameters are classified above my clearance level." Marcus's confidence flickered for the first time. In his experience, confused civilians didn't carry classified military orders with authorization codes that stumped full colonels. Cross leaned forward slightly in his corner booth, his trained ear catching every word of the exchange. Umbra Protocol had been tracking whispers of deep cover operatives for months, agents so deeply embedded that their true identities were known only to the highest levels of military intelligence. If this woman was what they suspected, the implications were staggering. Sir Martinez interjected, sensing Marcus' uncertainty in moving to support her superior. "With respect, those documents could be forgeries. Identity theft is a serious problem these days, and military credentials are valuable on the black market." It was a reasonable concern, and Harris nodded slowly. "Ma'am, I'm going to need to verify these orders through proper channels. Until then, I'm afraid I'll have to ask you to remain here under supervision." Alexandra simply nodded, her compliance so complete it seemed almost rehearsed. But Wilson noticed something the others missed, the way her eyes moved as Harris spoke, cataloging the positions of every person in the room, calculating angles and distances with the unconscious precision of someone trained in close-quarters combat. "In the meantime," Marcus said, seizing the opportunity to regain control of the situation, "maybe our guest wouldn't mind demonstrating some more of those impressive skills she showed us earlier." His voice carried a dangerous edge, now the tone of someone who had decided that subtlety was no longer necessary. Miller stepped forward, producing his own sidearm. "How about we move up to the M4 carbine, more complex weapon system, harder to fake your way through." He gestured toward the arms locker where several training weapons were secured behind reinforced glass. "That's not necessary," Harris began. But Marcus was already moving toward the locker, his squad falling in behind him, with the coordinated movement of a pack that had caught the scent of blood. "Oh, but I think it is necessary, sir," Marcus said, his voice respectful to Harris, but carrying an undertone that suggested he would not be deterred. "If this woman is going to wear our uniform on our base, she should be able to handle our equipment. It's a matter of unit integrity." The logic was sound enough to make Harris hesitate. Unit integrity was indeed sacred in military culture, and Marcus's concerns, while aggressively presented, weren't entirely unreasonable. The M4 carbine that Miller retrieved from the training locker was a standard-issue weapon familiar to every soldier in the room. It was also significantly more complex than the sidearm Alexandra had handled earlier, with multiple subsystems and a field stripping procedure that required both knowledge and experience to execute properly. 18 seconds, Marcus announced, consulting his watch with theatrical precision. That's the current base record for complete disassembly and reassembly. Think you can beat it, Princess? The challenge was impossible. Even experienced soldiers rarely broke the 22-second mark, and the base record belonged to Master Sergeant Rodriguez, a weapons instructor gifted with 15 years of experience. Marcus was essentially asking Alexandra to perform a miracle, and everyone in the room knew it. Alexandra approached the weapon table with measured steps, her small hands reaching for the carbine, with movements that seemed almost reluctant. The watching crowd pressed closer phones, recording everyone expecting to witness the moment when the pretense finally crumbled. She lifted the M4 with both hands, checking the chamber and confirming the weapon was safe with movements so automatic they seemed unconscious. Her fingers found the takedown pins, and the familiar ritual began. Upper receivers separated from lower with a soft click. Bolt carrier group extracted with mechanical precision. Buffer spring removed without the fumbling that usually characterized amateur attempts. Each component was placed on the table in perfect order, the disassembly flowing like a carefully choreographed dance. The crowd grew quiet as they realized they were witnessing something extraordinary. Alexandra's hands moved with the kind of fluid certainty that spoke of thousands of repetitions, muscle memory so deeply ingrained that conscious thought was unnecessary. 8 seconds for complete disassembly. The reassembly was poetry in motion. Components flowed together as if magnetized, each part finding its proper place without hesitation or adjustment. The final takedown pin snapped home with a sound like a closing door, and Alexandra stepped back from a fully assembled weapon. Total time 16 seconds. A new base record. The silence that followed was profound, broken only by the soft hum of the building's ventilation system. Marcus stared at the stopwatch in his hand, as if it had personally betrayed him, while Martinez's face cycled through expressions of disbelief, confusion, and growing unease. Harris stepped forward, his experienced eye examining the weapon Alexandra had assembled. Every component was in perfect position, the action smooth as silk when he tested it. This wasn't luck or YouTube knowledge. This was the kind of competence that came from intensive professional training. "Where did you learn to do that?" Harris asked quietly, his voice carrying a weight that suggested the answer might be more important than anyone realized. Alexandra's response was barely audible, delivered to the floor rather than to her questioner. "Practice, sir." But Cross had heard enough. He activated his phone again, this time placing a call to a number that didn't officially exist. When the connection opened, he spoke in a voice too low for anyone else to hear. "Priority alert. Target has demonstrated advanced weapons proficiency. Request immediate background analysis and extraction protocols." The response was immediate. "Understood. Maintain surveillance. Do not engage until identity is confirmed." Marcus's confidence was cracking out, the carefully constructed narrative of superior dealing with inferior beginning to crumble in the face of evidence he couldn't explain away. But rather than backing down, he chose to escalate his psychological makeup, requiring him to maintain dominance at any cost. "Neat trick," he said, his voice carrying a forced casualness that fooled no one. "But handling weapons is only part of being a soldier. Let's see how you do with some real military knowledge." He began firing questions in rapid succession, each one designed to expose supposed civilian ignorance. "What's the effective range of an M4 carbine? What's the standard load for a combat medic? How do you call for close air support in a danger-close situation?" The questions came like machine gun fire, each one technical enough to stump most civilians and many soldiers. But Alexandra answered them all, her responses crisp and precise, delivered with the kind of casual confidence that suggested the information was so basic it hardly required conscious thought. 550 meters, point target, 600 meters, area target, she began, her voice gaining strength with each answer. "Combat medic carries IV fluids, trauma bandages, morphine autoinjectors, and quick-clot hemostatic agents. Danger close air support requires authentication with higher command, precise target coordinates, and personnel accountability within the blast radius." Her answers weren't just correct. They were exhaustively complete, delivered with the kind of detail that spoke of advanced training and real-world experience. Martinez found herself taking notes, trying to remember information that Alexandra rattled off without apparent effort. Miller decided to try a different approach, pulling out his smartphone and accessing a military database. Okay, let's try some current tactical scenarios. You're pinned down by sniper fire from an elevated position. Your squad is taking casualties. How do you respond? It was a complex scenario that required understanding of advanced tactical principles, the kind of question used in staff college examinations. Alexandra didn't hesitate. Identify sniper position through muzzle flash and impact analysis. Deploy smoke for concealment, while moving casualties to hard cover. Establish suppressive fire with squad automatic weapons to fix the sniper in position. Call for counter-sniper support or close air support, depending on available assets. If neither available, coordinate flanking maneuver, using available terrain while maintaining base of fire. The answer was textbook perfect, delivered with the casual confidence of someone who had faced exactly this scenario in real combat conditions. Miller found himself nodding along, recognizing the sound tactical thinking, even as he wondered where a supposed civilian could have learned such advanced concepts. Alexandra adjusted the military-grade Suunto tactical fitness tracking device on her wrist, with movements that spoke of long familiarity with specialized equipment. The ruggedized smartwatch wasn't just monitoring her heart rate and sleep patterns, it integrated GPS navigation capabilities with water resistance rated to depths of over 100 meters. Advanced sensor technology tracks stress levels and recovery time following high-intensity activities essential for personnel operating in high-pressure environments. The demonstration was becoming uncomfortable for everyone involved. Each question designed to expose Alexandra as a fraud instead revealed depths of knowledge that seemed impossible for a civilian to possess. Marcus's squad exchanged uncertain glances, their earlier confidence replaced by growing unease. Harris felt the situation shifting beneath his feet like quicksand. His military instincts were screaming warnings, but he couldn't quite identify the source of his concern. The woman standing before him looked harmless enough, yet she had just demonstrated weapons proficiency that exceeded most of his seasoned soldiers and tactical knowledge that belonged in advanced military academies. Cross received another encrypted message, this one containing preliminary background analysis that made his blood run cold. The facial recognition algorithms had found something, a partial match buried in classified databases that shouldn't have been accessible to Umber protocol. If the analysis was correct, they had just stumbled onto something far more significant than a simple surveillance operation. Let's try field medicine, Martinez suggested, pulling a first aid kit from behind the serving counter. Any real soldier should know basic trauma care. She was grasping for something, anything that might restore the natural order where she and her colleagues were superior and this small woman was properly subordinate. The medical kit Martinez produced was standard military issue, containing everything from pressure bandages to emergency airways. She selected a complex trauma scenario, the kind that would challenge even trained medics. Soldier takes shrapnel to the thigh, severing the femoral artery. He's conscious, but losing blood fast. You've got maybe 3 minutes before he bleeds out. What do you do? It was a brutal scenario, one that required not just theoretical knowledge, but the kind of calm precision that came from seeing real combat wounds. Martinez expected hesitation, maybe even revulsion from someone who was supposedly a civilian. Instead, Alexandra moved with the fluid efficiency of a trauma surgeon. Her hands located the pressure points, immediately applying direct pressure with exactly the right amount of force. Control bleeding with direct pressure proximal to the wound, she said, her voice steady and clinical. Apply tourniquet 2 inches above the injury site. Tighten until pulse disappears distal to the wound. Treat for shock by elevating the legs and maintaining body temperature. Establish IV access and administer fluid replacement. Prepare for emergency evacuation. As she spoke, her hands demonstrated each procedure on the training mannequin with movements so precise they seemed choreographed. But it was the casual competence that caught everyone's attention, the way she handled the medical equipment like it was an extension of her own body, the automatic muscle memory that spoke of extensive training under pressure. Time to pulse stop 45 seconds, Alexandra added, checking her watch with the kind of clinical precision that belonged in an emergency room. Patient stabilized for transport. The performance was flawless, executed with a level of skill that would have impressed military medics with years of field experience. Martinez stared at the mannequin, then at Alexandra, then back at the mannequin, her mind struggling to process what she had just witnessed. Wilson watched the proceedings with growing amazement and mounting concern. His initial sympathy for Alexandra was evolving into something approaching awe, mixed with the uncomfortable realization that he had no idea who this woman really was. The casual competence she displayed wasn't normal. It was the kind of skill set that belonged to elite operators, the kind of people whose very existence was classified. Marcus sensed the situation slipping away from him entirely, his carefully constructed narrative crumbling in the face of evidence he couldn't explain or dismiss. But rather than accepting defeat, his psychological makeup demanded escalation. If he couldn't prove Alexander was incompetent, he would prove she was dangerous. Interesting skills for a civilian, he said, his voice taking on a harder edge. Makes me wonder where someone picks up that kind of training. Special schools, private military contractors, or maybe somewhere even more unofficial. The implications were clear, and Harris felt his concern ratcheting up another notch. Marcus was essentially accusing Alexandra of being some kind of covert operative, which seemed absurd given her appearance, but increasingly plausible given her demonstrated capabilities. Sergeant Harris warned, "You're heading into territory that requires more than speculation." But Marcus was beyond listening to warnings, his need to maintain dominance overriding his better judgment. "Sir, with respect, we have an unidentified individual with advanced combat training on our base, carrying questionable orders and demonstrating skills that most of our own soldiers don't possess. At what point do we start asking harder questions?" It was a reasonable concern delivered in the kind of aggressive tone that made it feel like an attack. Alexandra stood quietly through the exchange, her posture remaining submissive, even as her demonstrated competence suggested she was anything but helpless. Cross made his decision. The preliminary background analysis had raised enough red flags to justify immediate action. He rose from his corner booth with movements calculated to draw no attention, beginning a careful approach toward the main group while maintaining the appearance of casual interest. Miller decided to try one final test, something so specialized that no civilian could possibly have the required knowledge. Land navigation, he announced, pulling out a topographical map of the local area. Plot a course from here to Checkpoint Alpha, avoiding known patrol routes and maintaining concealment from observation posts. It was a complex military exercise that required understanding of terrain analysis, enemy capabilities, and tactical movement principles. The map he spread on the table was covered with military symbols and elevation markers that would be meaningless to anyone without extensive training. Alexandra studied the map for exactly 15 seconds, her eyes moving in systematic patterns that suggested she was processing information according to established protocols. Then she began marking waypoints with a confidence that made Harris lean forward with sharp attention. Primary route follows this ridgeline to maintain elevation and avoid the observation post at grid 279er. She said, her finger tracing a path across the map with absolute certainty. Alternate route uses this stream bed for concealment, but increases travel time by approximately 40 minutes. Emergency extraction point here with fallback rally point at this elevation. The route she plotted was tactically sound, taking advantage of terrain features that would provide concealment while avoiding known observation points. But more than that, it demonstrated an understanding of military movement principles that belonged in advanced infantry schools, not civilian experience. Harris found himself studying the route with professional interest, recognizing the sophisticated tactical thinking involved. This wasn't someone who had learned basic navigation from a hiking guide. This was someone who understood military movement at an advanced level. "Where did you learn tactical movement?" he asked quietly, his question carrying the weight of genuine curiosity rather than hostile interrogation. Alexandra's answer was the same as before, delivered with the same quiet humility. "Practice, sir." But the word carried different weight now in the context of everything they had witnessed. What kind of practice produced this level of competence? What kind of training created skills that exceeded those of career soldiers? Cross had heard enough. His encrypted phone buzzed with an incoming message that made his expression harden. Target identified. Highest priority. Maintain surveillance and prepare for immediate extraction. The message confirmed his worst fears. Umber Protocol didn't issue highest priority designations lightly. They were reserved for individuals who posed existential threats to ongoing operations. If Alexandra Hayes was who they suspected, her presence at Fort Maxwell wasn't coincidental. Marcus's psychological profile was becoming increasingly evident as the situation evolved. His need to dominate, to control, to be the alpha in every situation was driving him to escalate beyond reason. The fact that Alexandra remained submissive in manner while demonstrating superior competence was creating a cognitive dissonance that his mind couldn't process healthily. I think, Marcus said slowly, his voice taking on a dangerous quality, that it's time for a more thorough inspection. Strip search procedures. Make sure our guest isn't carrying anything that might be dangerous to base security. The words hit the canteen like a physical blow. Harris's head snapped around, his face darkening with anger. Sergeant, you are way out of line. Am I, sir? Marcus replied, his tone respectful, but carrying an undertone of challenge. We have an unidentified individual with advanced combat training, questionable credentials, and demonstrated weapons proficiency. At what point does prudent security override social niceties? Martinez stepped forward, sensing an opportunity to support Marcus, while positioning herself as the voice of female solidarity. I could conduct the search, sir. Keep it professional. Make sure there are no irregularities. The offer was made with false concern, but the malicious anticipation in Martinez's eyes was unmistakable. She had been building toward this moment, the ultimate humiliation that would restore the proper order of things. Wilson felt something twist in his stomach as he realized where this was heading. His grandfather's voice echoed in his memory, talking about the difference between following orders and doing what was right. Sir, this isn't necessary. She's cooperated with everything we've asked. Private Wilson, Marcus said, his voice carrying a warning. You seem to have strong opinions about how we should handle security procedures. Maybe you'd like to explain to the colonel why you think protocol should be ignored. It was a direct challenge to Wilson's military career, delivered with the kind of calculated precision that Marcus specialized in. Follow orders and watch an innocent woman be humiliated, or stand up for what was right and face the consequences. Harris felt the situation spiraling beyond his control, his command authority being undermined by Marx's aggressive interpretation of security protocols. The technical justifications were sound enough to provide cover, but the malicious intent was clear to anyone with eyes. I'll need to consult with, Harris began, but Alexandra's voice cut through the tension with unexpected clarity. It's fine, she said, her voice carrying a quality that made everyone in the room turn to look at her. If Sergeant Reynolds believes a search is necessary for base security, I'll comply. And the words were spoken with such calm acceptance that they seemed to echo in the sudden silence. Alexandra's posture remained submissive, but something in her tone suggested this capitulation wasn't defeat. It was a choice. Marcus' face lit up with predatory satisfaction, interpreting her compliance as final victory. Outstanding. Martinez, conduct the search. Make it thorough. But Cross felt a chill run down his spine as he watched Alexandra's reaction. Her body language remained submissive, almost defeated, but her eyes, there was something in her eyes that suggested Marcus had just made a catastrophic error in judgment. Harris recognized it too, the subtle shift from victim to something else entirely. In 30 years of military service, he had learned to read the signs that preceded violence, and every instinct he possessed was suddenly screaming warnings. Wait, Harris said, his voice carrying sudden urgency. I think we should— No, sir, Alexandra interrupted gently, her hands moving to the buttons of her oversized uniform jacket. The sergeant is right. If there are questions about my authorization to be here, they should be resolved through proper procedures. Her fingers found the first button, and Marcus's smile widened with anticipation. Martinez stepped forward with the eager satisfaction of someone about to deliver a decisive blow. The watching crowd pressed closer, phones recording everyone, anticipating the moment when the pretense would finally be stripped away. But Wilson noticed something the others missed. As Alexandra's jacket began to come undone, her breathing had changed. The rapid, shallow breaths of fear had been replaced by something else entirely. The measured, controlled breathing patterns used in combat situations to maintain heart rate and ensure optimal performance under stress. Cross activated his phone one final time, sending a brief message that would set events in motion. Target preparing to reveal identity. Request immediate backup and extraction protocols. The response was instant. Negative. Maintain surveillance only. Do not interfere regardless of circumstances. Alexandra's jacket fell away, leaving her standing in the fitted gray t-shirt that emphasized both her delicate build and the unexpected definition of someone in peak physical condition. The fabric clung to muscles that spoke of intensive training of a body honed for purposes that civilian life couldn't explain. Now the shirt, Marcus ordered, his voice thick with anticipation. Alexandra's hands moved to the hem of her gray t-shirt, her movements calm and deliberate despite the hostile attention focused on her. Around the canteen, conversations had stopped entirely, the usual Friday evening chaos replaced by the tense anticipation that precedes revelation. Harris felt his unease crystallizing into genuine alarm as he watched Alexandra's complete lack of fear or embarrassment. In his experience, innocent civilians faced with public humiliation displayed predictable reactions: tears, anger, desperate attempts to preserve dignity. Alexandra displayed none of these. Instead, there was something in her posture, in the way she held herself, that reminded Harris of elite operators he had encountered in classified briefings. It was the kind of deadly calm that came from absolute confidence in one's own capabilities. "Sergeant," Harris said, his voice carrying new urgency, "I'm ordering you to stand down." But Marcus was beyond listening to orders, his psychological need to dominate overriding military discipline. "Sir, the search is already in progress. We need to see this through." Martinez positioned herself for an optimal viewing angle, her phone ready to capture what she assumed would be the ultimate humiliation. Miller and the others pressed closer, their expressions mixing cruel anticipation with the uncomfortable excitement of witnessing someone else's destruction. Only Wilson seemed to recognize that something was terribly wrong. His grandfather's combat instincts, inherited through blood and training, were screaming warnings that he couldn't quite articulate. Cross-watched from his position near the exit, his trained eye cataloging every detail of Alexandra's behavior, the complete absence of fear, the measured breathing, the way her eyes continued to track potential threats, even while appearing submissive. It all pointed to a conclusion that Umbra Protocol had suspected, but hadn't dared confirm. Alexandra's hands gripped the hem of her t-shirt, and the entire canteen held its breath. Marcus's smile reached its maximum width. Martinez's phone focused for optimal recording, and 200 soldiers prepared to witness what they assumed would be the final destruction of a pretentious civilian. None of them realized they were about to see something that would change their understanding of power identity and the dangerous assumption that strength always announces itself. Alexandra began to lift her shirt, revealing first the toned muscles of her abdomen, then the defined lines of someone whose physical conditioning went far beyond civilian fitness standards. But it was what lay beyond, hidden beneath the fabric, that would transform every assumption in the room. In the corner of the canteen, Cross made his final assessment and began moving toward the exit. Whatever was about to be revealed, Umbra Protocol had given him clear instructions: observe record and retreat. The highest priority classification meant that direct engagement was forbidden, regardless of circumstances. Harris felt time slowing as he watched Alexandra's movements. Every instinct developed over 3 decades of military service was screaming that they were all about to witness something that would have consequences far beyond a simple base incident. Marcus's confidence had reached its peak, his psychological need for dominance finally about to be satisfied through the complete humiliation of someone who had dared to challenge his authority. But Alexandra's expression remained serene, almost peaceful, as if she had been waiting for exactly this moment. Her hands continued their steady progress, lifting the gray fabric that concealed whatever truth lay beneath. The gray t-shirt rose higher, revealing more of Alexandra's remarkably conditioned torso. But it was the growing glimpse of something dark against her skin that began to capture attention. Not injury or imperfection, but the edge of something deliberate, something that spoke of meaning and significance beyond casual decoration. Marcus's breathing had become audible as his anticipation reached fever pitch, while Martinez's phone remained focused with predatory intensity. The watching crowd pressed closer, their collective attention creating a pressure that should have been overwhelming for any normal person. But Alexandra Hayes was becoming increasingly clear that she was not any normal person. As the fabric cleared her lower back, the first details of what lay beneath began to emerge: intricate black lines that spoke of professional artistry of hours spent under the needle, creating something that was part art, part declaration, part warning. The room held its breath as more of the tattoo became visible. It wasn't just any tattoo. It was a masterpiece of black ink that seemed to absorb light itself. Two massive dragons, one dark as midnight, one gleaming like polished bone, their serpentine bodies intertwined in perfect yin-yang symmetry across her entire back. The artistry was breathtaking, each scale individually detailed, each claw sharp enough to seem real, each eye burning with an intensity that made the artwork seem alive. But it was the flames that truly captured attention. Intricate tongues of fire surrounded the dragons, each flame rendered with such precision that they seemed to dance and flicker in the fluorescent lighting. The entire design covered Alexandra's back from shoulder blade to shoulder blade, from the base of her neck to her lower spine, a canvas of skin transformed into something that spoke of power, balance, and deadly purpose. Complete silence descended on the canteen like a physical weight, the kind of silence that comes when the world shifts on its axis and everyone present knows they are witnessing something that will change everything. Wilson was the first to break his voice, barely a whisper. Holy shit, that's the dragon balance. The words hit the room like a thunderclap. Every soldier with advanced training knew what Wilson had just identified. The dragon balance was legend myth, the kind of story told in hushed voices in classified briefings. Only 12 people alive were authorized to wear that marking, and each one represented the absolute pinnacle of military special operations. Colonel Harris's reaction was instantaneous and decisive. He snapped to full military attention, his hand rising in a crisp salute that belonged in ceremonial reviews. His weathered face had gone pale, but his voice carried the weight of absolute recognition. Lieutenant Alexandra Hayes, call sign Ghost Dragon, Navy SEAL Team 6. The formal identification landed like a mortar round in the stunned silence. Marcus's face drained of all color, his confident smirk dissolving into an expression of pure horror. Martinez's phone slipped from nerveless fingers, clattering on the concrete floor with a sound like breaking bones. Miller staggered backward, his hands involuntarily rising as if in surrender. But the reactions were only beginning as word spread through the canteen. The transformation was spectacular. Soldiers who had been laughing minutes before now stood frozen in place, their phones forgotten, their cruel entertainment transformed into the dawning realization that they had just witnessed something unprecedented. The dragon balance, someone whispered from the back of the crowd. Only 12 people alive have that marking. Ghost Dragon, another voice breathed, the phantom who saved Echo Company in Afghanistan. The recognition spread like wildfire. Alexandra Hayes wasn't just any Navy SEAL. She was legend-made flesh, one of the most decorated and feared special operators in military history. The woman they had been mocking, the civilian they had been humiliating, was someone whose very existence was classified at levels that made most of their security clearances look like kindergarten hall passes. Marcus's psychological breakdown was complete in public. His hands shook as the full weight of what he had done crashed down on him. He had just ordered a Navy SEAL Team 6 operator to strip, had humiliated someone whose service record included operations that had literally shaped the course of international conflicts. That's impossible, he stammered, his voice cracking. She can't be. I mean, look at her. But looking at Alexandra now with the dragon balance revealed and her true identity, known everything made terrible sense. The perfect weapons handling, the advanced tactical knowledge, the medical expertise, the complete calm under pressure. It all pointed to exactly what she was, one of the most elite warriors in human history. Martinez struggled to retrieve her phone from the floor, her hands shaking so badly she could barely grasp it. The video she had been recording would never see the light of day. Filming a classified operator was a federal offense that could result in treason charges. Wilson felt a mixture of vindication and terror. His grandfather's instincts had been right. This woman was someone special, someone who deserved respect. But the scale of what he had witnessed was beyond his comprehension. Harris maintained his salute, his military bearing absolute despite the chaos around him. Ma'am, I apologize for the circumstances of this revelation. At ease, Colonel, Alexandra said quietly, her voice carrying a new authority that had seemed to fill the entire space. You couldn't have known, that was the point. She lowered her t-shirt with the same calm precision she had used for everything else covering the dragon balance, but leaving the knowledge of its presence burned into every mind in the room. When she spoke again, her voice carried the weight of someone accustomed to command, to life or death decisions, to operations that existed in the shadows between peace and war. My orders were to observe and assess base security protocols under deep cover. She continued her explanation, delivered with clinical precision. Sergeant Reynolds' behavior has provided extensive data. The implications were staggering. This hadn't been a case of mistaken identity or accidental humiliation. Alexandra Hayes had been here intentionally testing the base's personnel, evaluating their character and judgment under stress. Every insult, every cruel laugh, every moment of mockery had been documented and assessed by someone whose recommendations could reshape military careers. Marcus collapsed into a nearby chair, his face buried in his hands. The career he had built, the reputation he had cultivated, the future he had planned, all of it was gone, destroyed by his own arrogance and cruelty. Miller managed to find his voice, though it came out as barely more than a croak. "Ma'am, we didn't know." "Would it have mattered?" Alexandra asked her question, cutting through the noise of desperate apologies. Should respect be conditional on rank or reputation? Should basic human dignity depend on someone's ability to fight back? The questions hung in the air like smoke from a battlefield, unanswerable because everyone present knew the truth. Their behavior had revealed exactly who they were when they thought there would be no consequences. Cross had reached the exit, but he paused to send one final message. Identity confirmed. Ghost Dragon operational and aware. Recommend immediate mission abort. The response was swift and decisive. Understood. Extract immediately. All operations suspended. Umber Protocol had just learned that their 3-month surveillance operation had been compromised from the beginning. They hadn't been hunting Alexandra Hayes. She had been hunting them. Colonel Harris accessed his secure tablet, pulling up classified files that shed new light on the situation. "Lieutenant Hayes," he said, his voice formal but carrying unmistakable respect. "Your orders mentioned the Ghost program, but I wasn't aware it was still operational." Alexandra's eyes met his with an intensity that made several nearby soldiers take involuntary steps backward. "The program never stopped, Colonel. It just went deeper underground." She moved to a nearby table, gesturing for Harris to join her. The crowd parted before her like water breaking around a stone, no one daring to maintain eye contact for more than a split second. The Ghost program was established in 1982. She explained, her voice pitched for Harris alone, but in the complete silence of the canteen, every word carried. It was created as a direct response to Soviet deep cover operations that we discovered were infiltrating military installations across the country. Harris nodded, memories from his early career suddenly clicking into place. Project Voron. We detected their presence but could never confirm their objectives. Their objectives were us, Colonel. They were identifying and targeting our special forces infrastructure, preparing for systematic elimination in the event of open conflict. Alexandra's gaze swept the room, cataloging reactions with the automatic assessment of someone trained to notice everything. Ghost operators were designed to be the perfect counter individuals who could blend into any environment, who would never be suspected until it was too late. The Dragon Balance tattoo was our one constant, the mark that identified us to the few who needed to know. She tapped her wrist device and the Suunto tactical display changed, revealing monitoring capabilities far beyond standard military hardware. For the past 3 months, I've been conducting a comprehensive security assessment of Fort Maxwell. Every interaction, every security protocol, every leadership decision has been documented and analyzed. Her eyes found Marcus, who remained slumped in his chair like a broken marionette. "What I found was disturbing. Your base has been compromised, Colonel, not just by toxic leadership, but by something far more dangerous." Harris felt his blood run cold. "Compromised in what way?" "Umbra Protocol." Alexandra's voice hardened as she spoke the name. "A rogue intelligence unit operating without oversight or accountability. They've been monitoring your communications, documenting your security procedures, and identifying exploitable personnel for potential recruitment." Martinez, standing close enough to overhear, felt her face pale. "Umbra Protocol, I thought that was just a rumor, something they talked about in counterintelligence briefings." "It's very real, Lieutenant," Alexandra replied. "Originally formed after 9/11 as a special counterintelligence unit to identify internal threats, it gradually evolved into something far more dangerous, a shadow organization that sells information to the highest bidder without regard for national security." Harris's military mind immediately grasped the implications. "Captain Cross, that's why he's been monitoring the comms center for the past 3 months." Alexandra nodded. "Cross is one of their senior field operatives. He's been running a comprehensive surveillance operation on Fort Maxwell, identifying vulnerabilities and gathering intelligence. She tapped her wrist device again, bringing up a tactical display that showed real-time tracking of movement around the base perimeter. And right now, he's activating their extraction protocols, which means we have approximately 12 minutes before they destroy all evidence of their presence. The lights in the canteen flickered once twice, then died completely, plunging the space into darkness, broken only by the emergency lights that automatically activated along the baseboards. In the sudden darkness, Alexandra's voice cut through with calm authority. Everyone remain exactly where you are. Do not move. Do not speak. Do not activate any electronic devices. Her command was delivered with such absolute confidence that even Marcus, lost in his psychological breakdown, froze in place. Wilson felt his grandfather's combat instincts surge to life, every nerve ending, screaming that they were in mortal danger. In the darkness, Alexandra moved like liquid shadow, her position shifting so silently that even those standing nearby couldn't track her movements. When she spoke again, her voice came from a completely different location. Private Wilson, you're going to be my communication relay. On my signal, you'll contact base security and provide the authentication code I'm about to give you. Wilson's throat was dry, but his voice remained steady. Yes, ma'am. Tango 77 Echo. Tell them Ghost Dragon is active and requesting immediate tactical support for hostile extraction. The authentication code meant nothing to Wilson, but he committed it to memory with the kind of focus that combat situations demanded. Around him, he could hear others breathing in the darkness, the tension so thick it was almost tangible. Alexandra's tablet glowed softly as she accessed systems that didn't appear on any organizational chart. The screen showed heat signatures moving around the base perimeter, tactical formations that spoke of professional military training. How many? Harris whispered his own combat experience, allowing him to read the tactical display over Alexandra's shoulder. 12 confirmed, Alexandra replied, possibly more in reserve positions. They're moving to secure the communications center and the command post. Martinez felt her training assert itself despite the chaos of the evening's revelations. Ma'am, if they're moving on communications and command, they're planning to isolate the base before conducting elimination operations. Correct, Alexandra confirmed, which means we have approximately 8 minutes before they reach this building. The timeline was impossibly tight, but Alexandra moved with the kind of calm efficiency that came from facing similar situations countless times before. Her hands flew across the tablet, sending encrypted messages to resources that existed in the deepest shadows of special operations. Backup is en route, she announced, but it won't arrive for 15 minutes. We need to hold this position and protect these witnesses until support arrives. Wilson felt a surge of pride mixed with terror as he realized they had transitioned from disciplinary situation to active combat operation. The small woman who had been mocked and humiliated was now orchestrating a defense against professional killers. Ma'am, Miller said, his weapons specialist training overcoming his shock. We're not equipped for defensive operations. The base armory is 3 buildings away, and if they've secured the communication center, we work with what we have, Alexandra replied. This isn't about superior firepower. It's about superior positioning and tactics. She began moving through the darkened canteen, her hands finding objects that could be repurposed as defensive tools. A chair became an improvised barrier. A fire extinguisher became a chemical weapon. A serving tray became a shield. Each item was positioned with the kind of tactical thinking that transforms civilian space into defensive terrain. Marcus, watching Alexandra's preparations from his position of despair, felt something stir in him that had been dormant since his childhood trauma. This was what real leadership looked like. Not the domination and control he had practiced, but the kind of calm competence that inspired others to rise above their limitations. What can I do? He asked quietly, his voice carrying a humility that had been completely absent from his earlier behavior. Alexandra paused in her preparations, studying Marcus' face in the dim emergency lighting. What she saw there, genuine remorse, desperate desire for redemption, willingness to sacrifice for others, made her decision easy. You can help Private Wilson with communications, she said. Your knowledge of base security protocols will be essential for coordinating with friendly forces. It was a small task, but Marcus seized on it with the gratitude of someone who had been offered a chance at redemption. For the first time in hours, he had a purpose that extended beyond his own failures. Alexandra returned to her tablet, analyzing the tactical situation with the kind of rapid assessment that came from years of combat experience. The heat signatures were moving with coordinated precision, establishing overlapping fields of fire and securing all potential escape routes. "They're not planning to take prisoners," she said quietly, her assessment delivered with clinical precision. "This is an elimination operation designed to remove all witnesses to their surveillance activities." Harris felt his protective instincts surge as he looked around at the soldiers under his command. These weren't elite operators or special forces personnel. They were regular army trained for conventional warfare, not the kind of shadow conflict that Alexandra operated in. "Ma'am, with respect, most of these soldiers aren't prepared for this level of combat." "Then we give them what they're not expecting," Alexandra replied. "They're prepared for military resistance, for conventional tactics and predictable responses. They're not prepared for creative asymmetric warfare." She began distributing tasks with the kind of tactical efficiency that made it clear she had done this before. Martinez was assigned to establish a secondary communication post using emergency protocols. Miller was tasked with creating improvised weapons from kitchen equipment. Wilson would coordinate with base security, while Marcus provided intelligence on facility layout and defensive positions. But even as Alexandra organized their desperate defense, she was implementing a larger strategy that none of them could see. The encrypted messages she had sent weren't just calling for backup. They were activating a network of assets that had been positioned around Fort Maxwell for months, cross-racing through the darkness toward an extraction point that no longer existed, received a final message that stopped him in his tracks. "All exits compromised. Friendly forces have you surrounded. Surrender or face elimination." The message was accompanied by photographic evidence that made his blood turn to ice. Images of Umbra Protocol operatives in custody, surveillance posts being dismantled, communication networks being shut down. The organization he had served for years was being systematically destroyed by forces he hadn't even known existed. Back in the canteen, Alexandra's preparations were reaching completion when her tablet chimed with an incoming priority message. The tactical display showed new signatures approaching the base, not the professional killers of Umbra Protocol, but something else entirely. "Backup has arrived early," she announced, relief evident in her voice for the first time all evening. But when the emergency lighting suddenly blazed to full intensity and the main doors burst open, what entered wasn't a standard military response team. Instead, figures in full tactical gear moved with the fluid precision of elite operators, their movements coordinated to the point of seeming choreographed. "Ghost Dragon status report," the lead figure called out, their voice carrying the authority of command. "Area secure, casualties, nil witnesses protected." Alexandra replied, her response delivered in the crisp military terminology that belonged to classified operations. Wilson watched in amazement as Alexandra's backup revealed themselves to be other operators bearing the same dragon balance, marking their tattoos visible as they secured the perimeter and established defensive positions. The canteen had become the center of operations for what was clearly a much larger mission. "Umbra Protocol assets in custody," the team leader reported. "Surveillance network dismantled, communication intercepts secured, elimination teams neutralized." The efficiency of the operation was staggering. In less than an hour, an international intelligence network had been identified, infiltrated, and destroyed by forces that operated so far off the official books that their very existence was deniable. Marcus, listening to the operational briefing with growing understanding, finally grasped the full scope of what he had stumbled into. This wasn't just about military assessment or cultural transformation. This was about protecting the nation from threats that conventional forces couldn't even identify. "Ma'am," he said quietly, approaching Alexander with the kind of respect he should have shown from the beginning. "I understand now why my behavior was so dangerous. It wasn't just about personal cruelty. It was about creating vulnerabilities that enemies could exploit." Alexandra studied Marcus' face, seeing genuine understanding, replacing the arrogance and insecurity that had driven his earlier actions. "Exactly, Sergeant. A military that tolerates abuse, that allows toxic leadership to flourish, becomes weak from within. That weakness can be exploited by adversaries who understand that the greatest victories are won without firing a shot." Martinez stepped forward, her own understanding crystallizing as she listened to the exchange. The harassment, the systematic humiliation, It wasn't just wrong, it was a security risk. It created division resentment in the kind of cultural problems that foreign intelligence services could manipulate. Every person who feels powerless, who believes the system is rigged against them, becomes a potential asset for hostile forces, Alexandra confirmed. Umbra Protocol recruited their sources from among military personnel who felt abandoned by their leadership, who believed they had been treated unfairly by the system they had sworn to serve. Wilson felt pieces clicking together as he realized the true scope of the operation they had witnessed. That's why the assessment was so important, not just to identify bad leaders, but to identify potential security risks before they could be exploited. And to identify good leaders. Alexandra added, her gaze moving to Wilson with approval. People who will stand up for what's right, who will protect others, who understand that true strength comes from service rather than domination. Harris, listening to the exchange with growing appreciation for the sophistication of Alexandra's mission, felt his respect for her deepening even further. She wasn't just a warrior or an operator. She was a guardian of the principles that made military service meaningful. The transformation protocols you mentioned, he said, they're designed to create a culture that's resistant to this kind of infiltration, aren't they? Among other things, Alexandra confirmed, strong military culture based on mutual respect and shared values is the best defense against subversion. When soldiers trust their leaders and believe in their mission, they become immune to the kind of psychological manipulation that Umbra Protocol specialized in. As the tactical team completed their security sweep and began processing evidence from the compromised surveillance network, Alexandra's tablet chimed with a priority alert that made her expression shift from satisfaction to concern. She studied the message for a long moment, her face revealing nothing but her posture subtly changing in a way that Harris recognized from years of command. Something had gone wrong. "Lieutenant," he asked quietly, "what's happened?" Alexandra's gaze moved to the tactical map, then back to the message. When she spoke, her voice carried a new intensity that made everyone in the room pay attention. "Ghost Dragon, priority tasking, Umbra Protocol elimination incomplete. High-value target escaped with classified intelligence. Your sister's location compromised. Immediate extraction required." The personal stakes that had been hidden beneath Alexandra's professional demeanor suddenly became clear. This wasn't just about military assessment or cultural transformation. It was about family, about people she loved who were now in danger because of her success. Wilson, standing close enough to read the message over her shoulder, felt his blood run cold. "Ma'am, your sister, is she in danger because of what happened here tonight?" Alexandra's expression hardened into something that reminded everyone present why she was one of the most feared operators in the world. "My sister is also Dragon Balance," she said quietly. "She's been conducting similar operations in Europe. If Umbra Protocol has her location, they'll use her as leverage to force my compliance with their demands." The revelation that Alexandra's sister was also an elite operator added another layer to the complexity of the situation. This wasn't just about Fort Maxwell or even Umbra Protocol. It was about a global network of threats that required equally global responses. "What are their demands?" Harris asked, though he suspected he didn't want to know the answer. Alexandra's tablet chimed with an incoming message that contained exactly what she had expected and dreaded. A photograph of her sister bound and unconscious, accompanied by text that made her jaw clench with barely controlled rage. "Surrender yourself to our custody within 72 hours or watch your sister die slowly. Come alone or she dies immediately. Any attempt to track or rescue her will result in immediate execution." The message was designed to exploit the one weakness that even elite operators possess: their love for family, their willingness to sacrifice themselves for those they cared about. But Marcus, reading the message with growing understanding of the stakes involved, surprised everyone by speaking up. "Ma'am, with respect, that's exactly what they expect you to do. They're counting on your emotional response overriding your tactical judgment." Alexandra turned to look at Marcus, seeing something in his eyes that suggested his psychological training had given him insights into manipulation that could be valuable. "Explain," she said simply. "They're using the same psychological leverage I used against others." Marcus said, his voice heavy with self-recognition. "Exploit someone's vulnerabilities. Make them feel powerless. Force them into choices that serve your interests rather than theirs. The only difference is scale." Martinez found herself nodding as she recognized the pattern Marcus had identified. It's manipulation at the strategic level. They're trying to turn your strength, your loyalty to family, into a weakness that defeats you. Wilson felt pieces clicking together as he realized what Marcus and Martinez were suggesting. But if we understand their psychological strategy, we can counter it. Instead of reacting emotionally, we respond tactically. Alexandra felt a surge of pride as she watched the soldiers she had been assessing demonstrate exactly the kind of critical thinking that made for effective leadership. They were learning, growing, transforming themselves into better versions of what they had been. "What do you recommend?" she asked, genuinely curious to hear their tactical assessment. Marcus stepped forward, his demeanor completely transformed from the arrogant bully he had been hours earlier. "We give them what they expect, your emotional surrender, while delivering what they don't expect, a tactical surprise." Miller joined the impromptu planning session, his weapons expertise adding practical considerations to the psychological insights Marcus had provided. "They'll expect you to come alone and unarmed. They won't expect you to come with backup positioned for coordinated assault." Harris found himself impressed by the quality of tactical thinking being displayed by soldiers he had written off as discipline problems. Crisis and proper leadership had revealed capabilities that routine military life had kept hidden. "The Dragon Balance Network," Martinez said, suddenly understanding dawning in her eyes. "Your sister isn't the only operator in the field. There are others who can coordinate rescue operations while you provide distraction." Alexandra's smile was sharp enough to cut diamond as she realized that her assessment of Fort Maxwell's personnel had yielded unexpected dividends. These soldiers, properly led and motivated, were demonstrating exactly the kind of creative tactical thinking that elite operations required. "Outstanding analysis," she said, pulling up communication protocols on her tablet. "But you're missing one crucial element of the tactical picture." Wilson leaned forward, eager to understand what they had overlooked. "What's that, ma'am?" "My sister doesn't need rescuing," Alexandra said, her smile becoming genuinely warm for the first time all evening. "She needs backup for the counter-operation she's already conducting." The revelation recontextualized everything they thought they understood about the situation. Alexandra's sister wasn't a helpless victim awaiting rescue. She was an elite operator conducting her own mission using Umbra Protocol's arrogance against them. "The photograph, the demands, the threat of execution, it's all theater," Alexandra continued. "My sister is exactly where she needs to be to complete the final phase of dismantling Umbra Protocol's network." Marcus felt his admiration for the Hayes sisters growing as he realized the sophistication of their operation. She allowed herself to be captured. She placed herself in position to be captured at the exact moment when it would provide maximum tactical advantage. Alexander corrected. "There's a significant difference." Harris shook his head in amazement as he contemplated the level of planning and coordination required for such an operation. "How long have you two been planning this?" "3 years, Alexandra replied. "Ever since Umbra Protocol made the mistake of targeting Dragon Balance operatives for elimination. They thought they were hunting us. We've been hunting them." As if summoned by her words, Alexandra's encrypted communication device chimed with an incoming priority message from halfway around the world. The text was brief but decisive. "Package delivered. Network terminated. Coming home. Love you, sis." The message was accompanied by photographic evidence that made even Alexandra's tactical team look impressed. Images of Umbra Protocol's leadership in custody, financial networks, frozen communication systems dismantled, and safe houses compromised. The organization that had threatened global security had been systematically destroyed by two women working in perfect coordination across continents. Wilson felt a chill run down his spine as he realized the scope of what he had witnessed. "Ma'am, this wasn't just about assessing Fort Maxwell. This was about using Fort Maxwell as bait to draw Umbra Protocol into a trap." "Correct," Alexandra confirmed. Umbra Protocol's obsession with eliminating Dragon Balance operatives made them predictable. They couldn't resist the opportunity to surveil someone they believed was isolated and vulnerable. Martinez's tactical mind was racing as she processed the implications. "You've been using yourself as bait for 3 months, allowing them to gather intelligence while you gathered intelligence on them, and using their surveillance to feed them information that led them exactly where we wanted them to go," Alexandra added. "Sometimes the best way to catch predators is to make yourself appear to be perfect prey." Marcus found himself studying Alexandra with something approaching awe as he realized the mental strength required for such an operation. You had to endure months of harassment of being underestimated and mocked, all while knowing you could stop it at any time. That's what made it such an effective test, Alexandra replied. Anyone can maintain their composure when they're in control. The measure of true character is how you behave when you appear to be powerless. Harris felt pieces of a much larger puzzle clicking into place as he considered the broader implications of Alexandra's mission. The other Dragon Balance operatives, the assessments at other installations. This is all part of a systematic evaluation of military culture and security vulnerabilities. The military faces threats that don't wear uniforms or carry flags, Alexandra confirmed. Cultural rot, toxic leadership, systematic abuse, these create vulnerabilities that hostile forces can exploit. The Dragon Balance program exists to identify and eliminate these threats before they can compromise national security. As the evening's events reached their resolution, Alexandra began the process of transitioning from covert operative back to official military personnel. The encrypted devices disappeared into secure pouches. The tactical gear was secured and the dragon tattoo was once again hidden beneath her gray t-shirt. But the transformation she had catalyzed at Fort Maxwell would continue long after her departure. The tactical team leader approached Alexandra with the efficient bearing of an experienced operator. Ma'am, extraction protocols are complete. All Umbra assets secured. Ready to proceed to Phase 3. Alexandra nodded, her posture shifting subtly as she assumed formal command. Excellent. Begin evidence processing and integration with Central Intelligence. I want full analysis within 48 hours. The operator saluted and moved away, already issuing orders through a secured communication device. Harris watched the exchange with growing appreciation for the scale of the operation they had stumbled into. Phase 3, he asked quietly. Transformation, Alexandra replied. The assessment phase is complete. The neutralization phase is nearly finished. Now we begin implementing the systemic changes necessary to prevent this from happening again. She pulled a secure tablet from her equipment bag, activating protocols that existed at classification levels Harris had never even heard of. Colonel Harris, effective immediately, you are tasked with implementing Ghost Dragon security protocols throughout Fort Maxwell. You'll receive comprehensive briefing materials within the next 24 hours. Harris straightened, automatically recognizing both the honor and the responsibility being placed on his shoulders. Yes, ma'am. What should I prioritize? Cultural transformation, Alexandra said without hesitation. Security vulnerabilities can be patched with technology and new procedures. But the human factor is always the most critical and the most difficult to address. Her gaze moved to Marcus, who stood nearby with the chastened posture of someone who had glimpsed the true depth of his failures. Sergeant Reynolds front and center. Marcus moved forward with military precision, coming to attention before Alexandra. His face was carefully neutral, but the tension in his jaw revealed the storm of emotions beneath. Sergeant Marcus Reynolds, Alexandra began, her voice carrying the formal weight of official judgment. Your behavior during this assessment has demonstrated significant leadership failures, psychological issues, and judgment deficiencies that require immediate corrective action. Marcus remained at attention, his gaze fixed on a point above Alexandra's head as military protocol demanded. But Wilson, watching carefully, saw the slight tremor in his hands, the only visible sign of the emotional turmoil beneath. Under normal circumstances, Alexandra continued, these failures would result in immediate disciplinary action, potential discharge, and the end of your military career. Martinez glanced at Marcus, expecting to see devastation on his face. Instead, she saw something unexpected: acceptance. Not defeat, but the calm recognition of someone facing the consequences of his actions. However, Alexandra's voice softened slightly. Your insights during the crisis and your willingness to acknowledge your failures suggest capacity for growth and rehabilitation. For the first time since she began speaking, a flicker of hope crossed Marcus' face, quickly suppressed as he maintained his disciplined posture. Therefore, you are hereby reduced in rank to Private First Class, effective immediately. You will report to the Psychological Operations Division at Fort Bragg in 72 hours for intensive evaluation and specialized training in ethical leadership, trauma response, and psychological warfare defense. The sentence was harsh, but offered a path to redemption, a chance to rebuild himself into someone worthy of the uniform he wore. It was more than Marcus had dared to hope for, and his response reflected genuine gratitude. "Thank you, ma'am. I won't squander this opportunity." Alexandra's gaze was penetrating as she studied his face, looking beyond his words to the truth beneath. Whatever she saw there seemed to satisfy her. "See that you don't, Reynolds, because I'll be watching." She turned to Martinez, who straightened automatically under that intense blue gaze. "Lieutenant Martinez, your participation in systematic harassment, your willingness to use your position to humiliate a perceived inferior, and your failure to uphold the standards expected of an officer will result in formal reprimand and demotion to second lieutenant." Martinez paled but nodded acceptance. Like Marcus, she understood that she was being offered a second chance that many in her position would not have received. "You will also complete specialized training in ethical leadership with particular focus on mentorship and the responsibility of female officers to create environments that elevate rather than undermine other women in the service." The specific nature of the training cut to the heart of Martinez's failures, and she flushed with shame as she recognized the truth in Alexandra's assessment. "Yes, ma'am, I understand." Do you, Alexandra's question was sharp, demanding absolute honesty. "Or are you simply saying what you believe I want to hear?" Martinez hesitated, then took a deep breath. "3 hours ago, I would have been saying what I thought you wanted to hear. Now I genuinely want to be better than I was today." Alexandra studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "That's a start, Lieutenant. Make sure your actions match your words going forward." Miller straightened as Alexandra turned toward him, anticipating his own judgment. "Corporal Miller, your technical competence is noted and valued. However, your willingness to participate in group harassment rather than demonstrate moral courage is concerning. You will undergo additional training in ethical leadership and decision-making under peer pressure before being considered for future advancement." Miller nodded, relief evident in his posture. His punishment was less severe than the others, reflecting his more limited role in the evening's events. Finally, Alexandra turned to Wilson, her expression warming noticeably. "Private Wilson, your moral courage in standing up for what's right, despite significant pressure to conform, demonstrates exactly the kind of character this military needs. You are hereby recommended for accelerated advancement and specialized leadership training, effective immediately." Wilson blinked in surprise. "Ma'am, I just did what my grandfather would have expected of me." "That's exactly the point, Private," Alexandra replied. "True character isn't what you do when everyone is watching and approving. It's what you do when standing alone would be easier. Your grandfather taught you well." She turned back to address the entire canteen, her voice carrying to every corner of the space. "What happened here tonight wasn't just about exposing Umbra protocol or testing individual soldiers. It was about identifying the cultural weaknesses that allowed infiltration in the first place. The Ghost Dragon protocols that Colonel Harris will be implementing aren't just about new security measures or different reporting structures. They're about transforming the fundamental culture of military service." Her words carried absolute conviction, the kind that came from years of seeing the consequences of failure. A military organization built on fear, intimidation, and toxic power dynamics will always be vulnerable to exploitation, not just by formal adversaries like Umbra Protocol, but by the kind of internal rot that destroys effectiveness from within. Harris nodded agreement, his own experience confirming the truth of her assessment. "The transformation won't be easy," Alexandra continued. "It will require confronting uncomfortable truths about how we train, how we lead, and how we define strength. But it is essential for the future security of this nation." As she spoke, her tactical team was already moving through the base, securing evidence, installing new monitoring systems, and beginning the process of comprehensive transformation that would make Fort Maxwell the model for a new kind of military culture. "Colonel Harris will oversee the immediate implementation phase," Alexandra announced. "Within 48 hours, every soldier on this base will begin specialized training in the new protocols. Within 30 days, Fort Maxwell will become the center for testing these new approaches before they're deployed across all branches of the armed services." The scope of the change was breathtaking, a comprehensive reimagining of military culture that would challenge decades of established tradition. But no one who had witnessed the events of the evening doubted its necessity. "Questions?" Alexandra asked, her gaze sweeping the room. For a moment there was silence as soldiers processed the magnitude of what they had heard. Then Miller raised his hand hesitantly. Ma'am, these Ghost Dragon protocols, are they new? Alexandra's smile was enigmatic. They're as old as warfare itself, Corporal. The understanding that true strength comes from character rather than force, that leadership flows from service rather than domination. These principles have been taught by every great military strategist from Sun Tzu to Patton. She touched the spot where the dragon balance tattoo lay hidden beneath her shirt. What's new is our commitment to systematically embedding these principles throughout our entire military culture rather than treating them as aspirational ideals that can be ignored in practice. Martinez had been studying the tactical team with growing curiosity. Now she voiced the question that had been forming in her mind. The Dragon Balance operators there are more of you than just you and your sister aren't there. How many? That information remains classified, Lieutenant, Alexander replied. But I can tell you this, there are enough of us to make a difference, and after tonight's assessment, there will be more. Her gaze moved meaningfully to Wilson, who straightened under her attention. The next generation of Dragon Balance operators won't be selected solely for physical prowess or tactical ability. They'll be chosen for the kind of moral courage you demonstrated tonight, the willingness to stand alone for what's right, regardless of personal cost. Harris had been reviewing the preliminary briefing materials on his tablet, his expression growing increasingly serious as he grasped the full scope of what was being proposed. This goes far beyond Fort Maxwell, doesn't it? This is about transforming the entire approach to military culture and security. Yes, Colonel, Alexandra confirmed. What happened here tonight is being replicated at 17 other installations across the globe. By this time tomorrow, the first phase of Ghost Dragon protocols will be implemented throughout all branches of the armed services. The systematic nature of the operation was staggering, a coordinated global initiative that had been years in the planning, involving hundreds of operatives working in perfect synchronization to transform the fundamental nature of military security. But why the secrecy, Wilson asked. Why not implement these changes through normal channels? Alexander's expression darkened. Because normal channels have been compromised, Private. Not just by Umbra protocol, but by decades of institutional resistance to meaningful change. Sometimes the only way to transform a system is from within, operating in the shadows where resistance can't organize against you. Her tablet chimed with an incoming message, and the slight shift in her posture told Harris that their time was growing short. I'll be departing within the hour, Alexander announced. The Dragon Balance team will remain on site for the next 72 hours to oversee the initial implementation and ensure there are no further security breaches. She turned to Harris, extending her hand in a rare gesture of personal respect. Colonel, the future of this initiative rests largely on your shoulders. Your leadership during the transformation phase will determine whether Ghost Dragon becomes a footnote in military history or the foundation for a new approach to national security. Harris accepted her hand, feeling the weight of responsibility settling on him like a physical burden. I understand, ma'am. We won't let you down. I know you won't, Alexandra replied, and her confidence seemed to strengthen him. 3 months later, Fort Maxwell had become unrecognizable to anyone who had known it before the night of Alexandra Hayes's revelation. Physical changes were immediately apparent. New security systems, different training facilities, reorganized command structures. But the most profound transformations were less visible. Marcus Reynolds, now Private First Class Reynolds, stood before a group of 30 soldiers in the base's newly established Ethical Leadership Center. His face was thinner than it had been 3 months ago, the arrogance replaced by a quiet intensity that spoke of hard-won wisdom. 3 months ago, I stood in the canteen over there and demonstrated everything a military leader shouldn't be. He began, his voice carrying the weight of personal experience. I used my rank and physical presence to intimidate. I confused dominance with leadership. I created an environment where cruelty was rewarded and moral courage was punished. The soldiers watching him remained silent, many of them witnesses to the events he described. What I didn't understand then, what the Ghost Dragon program forced me to confront, was that my behavior wasn't just morally wrong. It was strategically dangerous. I was creating exactly the kind of cultural vulnerability that our adversaries exploit to compromise our security from within. He gestured to the wall behind him, where the Dragon Balance symbol had been incorporated into the new Fort Maxwell insignia, a permanent reminder of the night that had changed everything. The past 3 months have been the most challenging of my life. Intensive psychological evaluation, confronting the childhood trauma that shaped my need for control, learning the difference between strength and force, between leadership and dominance. His gaze moved across the assembled soldiers, making eye contact with each one. I'm not standing here as a success story. I'm standing here as a work in progress, as living proof that transformation is possible if we're willing to confront our failures honestly and commit to becoming better than we were. Across the base, similar scenes were playing out as the Ghost Dragon protocols took root. Martinez was leading specialized training for female officers, focusing on building supportive mentorship networks rather than competitive hierarchies. Miller had discovered a talent for technical instruction, using his expertise to ensure that soldiers mastered their equipment without resorting to intimidation or mockery. And Wilson, now Sergeant Wilson, the youngest soldier to receive battlefield promotion in Fort Maxwell's history, was preparing for his next assignment, a specialized training program that would test both his tactical skills and his moral courage in ways he couldn't yet imagine. Colonel Harris watched these developments from his office, where the latest reports from other installations implementing Ghost Dragon protocols were displayed on secure monitors. The results were promising significant improvements in unit cohesion, dramatic reductions in security incidents, and unprecedented levels of reporting on potential vulnerabilities. A soft chime from his computer announced an incoming secure communication. The sender identification made him sit up straighter. RIG Dragon Alpha, Alexandra Hayes herself. The message was brief but meaningful. Phase 3 progress evaluation exemplary. Continuing to monitor. Tell Wilson to pack for cold weather. His next assignment begins in 72 hours. Harris smiled. Wilson's journey was just beginning, another piece in the expansive strategy that Alexandra Hayes and her Dragon Balance operators were implementing across the globe. As if summoned by his thoughts, there was a knock at his door, and Wilson entered at his invitation. "You wanted to see me, sir?" "Yes, Sergeant," Harris replied, noting how well the new rank sat on the young soldier's shoulders. "I have news about your next assignment." Wilson straightened his expression, betraying both excitement and apprehension. "Ghost Dragon program, sir." "That's classified, Sergeant," Harris replied with a small smile. "But I can tell you to pack for cold weather. You're shipping out in 72 hours. Wilson's eyes widened slightly. "May I ask where I'm going, sir?" "You may ask," Harris said, "but I can't tell you. What I can say is that Lieutenant Hayes specifically requested you for this assignment." The significance of that statement wasn't lost on Wilson. "She requested me personally." "She did," Harris confirmed. "And based on what I've seen over the past 3 months, I understand why. You've demonstrated exactly the qualities the new protocols are designed to develop: technical competence, combined with moral courage and adaptability." He rose from behind his desk, extending his hand to the young sergeant in a gesture of respect between equals, rather than the formal acknowledgement of rank. "Whatever they're sending you to do, Wilson, I have no doubt you'll make Fort Maxwell proud." Wilson accepted the handshake, his grip firm but not aggressive, one of many subtle changes that had spread throughout the base since the implementation of Ghost Dragon protocols. "Thank you, sir. I'll do my best." As Wilson turned to leave, Harris called after him. "Oh, and Sergeant Lieutenant Hayes left something for you. It's in the envelope on your bunk." Wilson nodded and departed, curiosity evident in his stride. In his barracks, Wilson found a simple manila envelope on his precisely made bed. Inside was a small medallion bearing the dragon balance symbol, 2 intertwined dragons, one dark, one light, surrounded by flames. A handwritten note accompanied it. "Not all warriors bear the mark on their skin. Some carry it in their hearts. The dragon balance isn't just a tattoo, it's a promise to stand between light and shadow, to fight not just with weapons, but with moral courage. You've earned your place in our ranks, Sergeant Wilson. See you in Alaska." GD. Wilson held the medallion in his palm, feeling the weight of its significance. 3 months ago, he had been a raw recruit trying to live up to his grandfather's legacy. Now he was being invited to join something that transcended ordinary military service. A brotherhood and sisterhood dedicated to protecting not just American soil, but the ideals that made that soil worth defending. As he packed his gear for the mysterious assignment ahead, Wilson reflected on how much had changed since that night in the canteen. Fort Maxwell had transformed from a base riddled with toxic leadership and security vulnerabilities to a model of what military culture could be: professional without being cruel, disciplined without being abusive, effective, without sacrificing humanity. And perhaps most significantly, soldiers like Marcus Reynolds had been given the chance to confront their demons and rebuild themselves into the kinds of leaders the military truly needed. Not perfect, but self-aware. Not invulnerable, but resilient. Not dominant, but genuinely strong. Across the globe, Alexandra Hayes and her sister Amanda were already planning the next phase of Ghost Dragon protocols, identifying new vulnerabilities, recruiting new operators, and expanding the network that would protect American security interests in ways that conventional forces never could. The Dragon Balance symbol, once known to only 12 operators in the world, was becoming a beacon for a new kind of military culture, one that recognized that true strength came from character rather than force, that security depended on integrity as much as technology, and that the most dangerous threats often came not from external enemies, but from the compromises made in the name of power and control. As Wilson prepared to join their ranks, he carried with him not just his grandfather's legacy of service, but the lessons learned on that fateful night when a small woman with trembling hands had revealed herself to be the most dangerous person in the room, not because of her physical prowess or tactical skills, but because she understood that true power never needs to announce itself with cruelty or dominance. The Dragon Balance had been revealed, and the world was safer for it.